Before we get started, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so that you don't miss any of the content that is released by GoCollect. And if you're interested, head over to Wedge Antilles here on YouTube. Reggie here, your friendly neighborhood bodybuilder and comic book collector and the host of the GoCollect speculation video, and I want to welcome you to another episode. In this episode, we are going to take some time to review 6 fantastic blog posts that are available on the GoCollect.com website. And I will tell you that there is a ton of amazing content on the website, but in this video, we are only going to touch on 6 blog posts. And there is honestly a little something for everyone in this, and I hope that you'll enjoy it. And if you do, I certainly want to encourage you to leave some comments behind and also hit the thumbs up button. With that said, let's look at the first blog post. If you are an investor, collector, or speculator, this next blog post may actually resonate with you. Right now, collectibles are at a high, and comics certainly are no exception to that rule. And right now, a lot of people are being priced out of really awesome keys. And so our blogger actually takes some time to provide us with some alternatives. Instead of focusing on first appearances and things like that, the blogger is actually suggesting that we may want to take a look at books that focus on the origins of some really popular characters. And his argument here is that origin stories are overlooked and may also be undervalued. And so to that point, if we get these books, it may represent a pretty good opportunity for us. But the blogger doesn't just make the case for origin books, he also highlights several that you might want to consider. Given the pending release of the Eternals movie and the fact that we know the Black Knight is going to appear in that movie, there is a lot of excitement around this specific character. And as a result of that excitement, the value of the Black Knight's first appearance has skyrocketed. And we are specifically talking about Avengers issue number 48. When you look at how this book has performed over the last 3 years, what you see is that the value has gone up 173% for a 9.8 graded copy. And even when you look at the lesser grades, you also see that those books have gone up 30 some odd percent. And so for this reason and many others, a lot of people are priced out of participating in that Avengers book. And for that reason, you might want to consider getting his origin book. And we are specifically talking about Marvel Superheroes issue number 17. This is the origin of the Black Knight. And you can actually pick up mid-grade raw copies of this book for about $50 on eBay, which is a far cry from his first appearance. In addition to this book, our blogger cites a few others. The next book that he highlights is Uncanny X-Men issue number 102, and this is the origin story of Storm. Again, with this book, a lot of people are priced out of Storm's first appearance, that being Giant Size X-Men number 1. But Uncanny X-Men issue number 102 represents a great opportunity for people to still participate in Storm. And because the reality is the X-Men are coming to the MCU. And when the X-Men come to the MCU, you can rest assured that Storm is going to be a core character that Kevin Feige will play with. And so again, if you are interested in speculating on some of these books, you definitely want to check out this blog post. But again, the blogger makes a really great argument in this post as to why origin books could be an alternative if you find yourself priced out of some of those first appearances. And I've only touched on 2 books. There are others that are mentioned in this blog post. I want to encourage you to read it. It is linked in the description. In this next blog post, our blogger poses a provocative question. And essentially what he states over the course of this blog post is that Kraven is coming. Kraven the Last Hunter is going to appear at some point in a Spider-Man movie. Like, I think most people will agree that that is going to happen. But the question is this: who comes along with Kraven? That is the question the blogger is asking, but also answering. He is basically saying that we will probably get Calypso as well. And so, depending upon how big of a Spider-Man fan you are, you may or may not recognize that name at all. For those that don't know, Calypso is actually the love interest of Kraven's The Last Hunter. And she actually made her first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man issue number 209. And admittedly, she didn't have a major role to play early on, but over time, she kind of played a little bit more of an active role in encouraging Kraven to continue hunting Spider-Man, to motivate him to continue going after him, to prove that Kraven was the greatest. And at various points, she even used other people to antagonize Spider-Man, specifically during Todd McFarlane's run on the Spider-Man title in the 90s. And so the big question is will we see Calypso? And if we see Calypso, is now the time to actually pick up her first appearance? The blogger does a really good job of making the case for who she is and why she's relevant and potentially why she's going to come into the MCU, but he also identifies the values associated with her first appearance. And if you're going to get in, now is a good time to do it. And I say that because 9.8 graded copies of her first appearance are only selling for around $110. And if you drop down a grade to a 9.6, you could potentially pick up one of these books for around $42, which is not a bad price to pay. And so if you believe that Kraven is coming, and if you believe that Kraven is coming with Calypso, this is a blog post that you want to check out because her first appearance could be right up your alley. This blog post is linked down in the description. There is so much excitement around Star Wars that it is unbelievable. It really is. And there was that whole commercial that came out featuring Patty Jenkins, the director of the upcoming Star Wars Rogue Squadron movie, that captured people's attention, right? She talked about the fact that her father was a fighter pilot and her goal was to make the best fighter movie of like all time to honor her dad. And so I believe that she is going to give this new movie, this new Star Wars movie, her all, because she's declared that this is important to her, not just as a job, but to really pay respect to her father, who I believe lost his life in the line of duty serving this country. And so for lots of different reasons, there is a lot of excitement around this new Patty Jenkins movie. And so our blogger does a really solid job over a few pages of talking about Patty, talking about Rogue Squadron, as well as like the source material that will potentially be used for this movie. But he also highlights several different comics that you may want to consider picking up and adding to your collection. Doing this because, again, if this franchise is, brought back to the forefront through Patty's work, then some of these books could see an increase in value. And so over the course of this blog post, he highlights several different books, new and old, that you may want to check out. One of the first books that the blogger talks about is Star Wars X-Wing Rogue Squadron issue number 1. And I believe that there are a couple of different versions of this book, but we are specifically talking about the regular A cover of this book. At a 9.8, this book currently has an FMV of around $45, but it should be mentioned that there is not a lot of sales data for this book, but not a bad book to pick up. You might actually be able to find it relatively inexpensively at local comic shops and possibly online as well. The blogger goes on to talk about several other X-Wing Rogue Squadron books that you may want to consider, but I'm not going to talk about those. I want to talk about the first appearance of Wedge Antilles. We are specifically talking about Star Wars issue number 5. This is the original Star Wars book that we're talking about, volume 1. Right now, this book has an FMV at a 9.8 of $170. At a 9.6, that FMV actually drops to about $90. And again, this is the first appearance of Wedge, and many believe that this new movie that Patty is putting together may be centered on him, and so potentially his first appearance is not a bad way to go. Again, if you want to participate in some of the Star Wars excitement, this is a blog post that you may want to read. So I have a question for you. If there were two pieces of original art sitting on the table in front of you, one from Stephen Ditko and one from Todd McFarlane, which piece of original art would you pick? That is essentially the question that is posed by our next blogger. He did a tremendous amount of research into some recent sales of original art on the same day in November of 2020 involving Stephen Ditko and Todd McFarlane. And many people might actually be surprised to learn that Todd McFarlane's original art actually sold for more than Stephen Ditko's work. And there's probably a lot of other people out there that are like, Stephen Ditko is the greatest. And we are specifically talking about some Spider-Man art. And both of these gentlemen are just important to the history of Spider-Man. Stephen Ditko helped to create Spider-Man back in the 60s, and Todd McFarlane in many ways revolutionized Spider-Man in the 90s. He was the guy that I grew up reading and watching in comics. And so there are going to be people on both sides that are going to be surprised by the fact, again, that Todd McFarlane's art actually sold for more than Stephen Ditko's. Now, there's a lot of detail that is actually not there in terms of the quality of these respective pieces and what was actually depicted in one versus the other, but that's why you're going to read the blog post. That is why you are going to click on the link in the description and read this wonderful blog post in its entirety, because you want to know the details as to how and why Todd's work sold for more than Stephen Ditko's. It is linked, this blog post, down in the description. So after a lot of trolling by Tom Holland, we now know that the new Spider-Man 3 movie is called No Way Home. And this is a movie that honestly has a lot of excitement around it. It seems like every few weeks something comes out new about this movie that keeps it in the public eye and keeps us talking about it again, like week after week after week. And our next blogger originally started out as a non-believer as to what comes next after the Spider-Man 3. But because of all of the castings and things that are being announced, he is now a believer that after No Way Home, we could potentially get something like One More Day and even Brand New Day. And the blogger is making these suggestions again because he is reading the tea leaves out there. And we are specifically talking about things like the reprisal of roles by Jamie Foxx and Alfred Molina, both as Electro and Doc Ock. And recently, there was even some rumors out there that Mr. Negative has been spotted on the set of the Spider-Man 3 movie. And because of all of these little pieces kind of falling into place, again, our blogger is making the recommendation or the suggestion that we're going to get something even bigger down the road. And believe it or not, all of this actually ties back to another major source of speculation, that being the WandaVision TV show. We know for a fact that there is going to be some connections between the Disney Plus TV shows and the movies, and people week after week after week are speculating on what's going to happen and how things are connected. And our blogger, again, does a really good job of making the case, connecting the dots. This is a blog post that you want to check out. It is linked in the description. Speaking of WandaVision, our next blogger is asking the question as to whether the WandaVision show is setting up a new show, one that is focused on the West Coast Avengers. When you take a step back from all of the shows that are on air right now on Disney Plus, and you think about those shows with the shows that are coming, what you see is that there are individuals that essentially constitute the West Coast Avengers. And so there is a possibility that we might see them on the small screen at some point. And if so, there are a couple of books that you may want to check out. And I will tell you that if you haven't seen the last episode of the WandaVision show, you definitely want to treat yourself. But I will also tell you that when you watch the credits at the very end, there is something that connects that show directly to the West Coast Avengers titles. And so again, if you believe that there is some possibility here that we could see the West Coast Avengers on the small screen, our blogger does a solid job of highlighting 4 books that you may want to check out. One of those books is the limited series from 1984. We are specifically talking about West Coast Avengers issue number 1, again from 1984. 2 years ago, this book at a 9.8 averaged just over $100. Over the last 90 days, the fair market value of this book has increased to $200. And just recently, there was a record sale at $300. So definitely this is a book to pay attention to. By that same token, there is another issue number 1, specifically from 1985. This book is not performing as well as the aforementioned, but at a 9.8, this book is still commanding a respectable price of about $120. Again, there are a few other books that are mentioned in this blog post, but I'm not going to tell you what they are because I want to encourage you to check out the blog post for yourself. So there you have it. We have reached the end of another recap. If you enjoyed this video, I definitely want to encourage you to hit the thumbs up button, leave a comment behind, and tune in next week when we get to do this all over again.